Hi, good morning. I'm Margaret Scott. I'm one of the co-founders of the New York Southeast Asia Network, and I just scanned through and I saw that John Gershman, another co-founder, is also on. So John, if I miss anything, please jump in. It's congratulations to Meredith and your merry gang of grad students. And I just want to do a shout out to Jen Wong. I've heard how hard you've worked. And a lot of other people. And it's just so stunning that this has come together. Us at the network, there's 4 of us that are the co-founders, with the 5th, Eve Zucker from Yale and Columbia, Duncan McCargo from Columbia, Anne-Marie Murphy from Seton Hall, and our wonderful coordinator, Shrinath Poole. All of us have been rooting for you, and we are big supporters of this. Is a very novel and important initiative to bring the public universities together in the SUNY and CUNY, and we hope it will be a template for more. And I'm just so thrilled this is happening. And our network is all about this virtual collaboration. If you're not a member, please become one. There's a members page where you can add a bit about yourself. And also you can sign up for our newsletter, which during the academic year is weekly. And we are a hub for all the events having to do with Southeast Asia. And it's very exciting because out of nothing, we've built a lot of linkages and gotten people to know who's doing what on Southeast Asia. And I'm thrilled that Karen Strassler, who's also a member of NYSEAN and a great supporter of us, is moderating today's panel, which sounds fabulous. And congratulations to everyone. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So the last truly important thing that I need to do today is, as Margaret alluded to, it is a group of students who have put together this entire thing. So I want to thank all of them. And just in alphabetical order, we've got, it's a mixture of undergraduate and graduate students from SUNY Albany. So we've got Alyssa Giang, Eddie, Charmaine Willis, who's also a panelist, Jeffrey Nasri, Karina Andrasari, Crystal Fajardo, Nurul Widyaningrum, Quang Chao, and especially Zhang Wang. And so thanks very much to all of you who have put in a lot of work on short notice and with a lot of ingenuity to pull this all together. And thanks to all of our panelists and to those of you who have attended. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Karen Strassler.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I also want to extend my thanks to all of you, but particularly, I think we should also applaud Meredith for being the person to spearhead this initiative, which, as someone who's been in the public university system in New York and often felt very isolated as a Southeast Asianist. First, we got NYSEAN, which was fantastic and has been fantastic. And this is just another level of connection and resource for those of us working in Southeast Asia. So it's wonderful to see this happening and to be part of it. So welcome to the first panel of this inaugural conference. So this panel will be covering topics of accessing Southeast Asian specific library collections and archives, especially digitally, as well as Library of Congress resources. Also issues about conducting remote fieldwork, which of course is a very timely and important issue, and adapting research plans in the face of adversity, also timely for lots of reasons. So before I introduce the panelists, I just want to cover some logistical matters. We'll have all panelists go first, and then there will be a general Q&A section after those presentations are completed, and audiences can, you guys can either post your questions, but also really feel free to say them directly, orally. You know, we're trying to build connections here. So, you know, we'd love to hear from you in whatever way. I also just want to mention apologetically that I am going to have to bow out right at just a minute before 1. So, because I have another meeting I have to attend, unfortunately. So I may not be around to moderate the Q&A, and Meredith is going to take over that task from me. So I am going to introduce all of the panelists at once in the interest of sort of efficiency, in the order of the 4 panels that we're going to have today. So our first panelist will be Jeffrey Petersen, who is Associate Librarian at the Echols Southeast Asia Collection at Cornell, together with Emily Zinger, who is the Southeast Asia Digital Librarian, also at the Echols Southeast Asia Collection at Cornell. And that will be our first panel. Our second panel will be presented by Joshua Kueh and Ryan Wolfson-Ford, who are Southeast Asia reference librarians at the Asian Division of the Library of Congress. And then our third presenter will be Pamela McElwee, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Human Ecology at Rutgers University. And finally, we'll have Charmaine Willis, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at the University of Albany, SUNY. And thank you to all of the panelists. And please go ahead, Jeffrey and Emily, take it away. Emily? Oh, maybe Emily had to move.
Sorry, trying to move away from construction. If you could just give me one moment to reset up in a new location. I'm so sorry for the delay, but it'll just be a moment. All right, thank you. I'm so sorry again. Thank you everyone for your patience. Of course, the one day when I need a quiet workspace is the day there's a power saw directly outside of my window. But I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can begin this presentation here. All right. All right, and everyone can see this clearly? Perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Zinger, and I am the Southeast Asia Digital Librarian here at Cornell. And I want to talk today a bit broadly about how you can find online collections of primary source materials. So the greatest barrier between you, a researcher, and these digitized collections is this thing called digital siloing. So these collections that you're looking for are dispersed across the internet. They're not necessarily connected, right? You can think of them all in their own individual little silos. Often these digital items are part of a larger digital project, which itself is part of a larger digital library, which itself is part of a larger institutional website. And so buried underneath all these layers of internet content, it can be very difficult to find these rich resources if you don't know that they already exist in the first place. So let's say, for example, that you're looking for digital collections on historic photographs from Indonesia. So Cornell Digital Collections has a selection of historic images of Sumatra in our Croc Asia and Rare Materials Archive. Similarly, the digital collections at University of Hawaii Manoa also have some slides of Indonesia in their digital images collection. And the digital collections at at Harvard also have a smattering of slides and historic photographs from Indonesia mixed in with the rest of their digital collections. These are just 3 examples, right? There's more out there on this topic, but I chose this selection to demonstrate how similar items that might be of interest to a single researcher can be scattered across the internet. And so I know that this might sound a bit obvious so far, right? Different things are in different places, but it's nevertheless a massive issue for conducting online primary source research. So while researchers are often very familiar with what their own institutions have to offer online, it's less likely that you'll have a full understanding of all the digital collections out there related to your topic. Now, luckily, I am not here today without solutions. So having a more defined starting point for your online search can make a big difference in whether or not you find what's out there. And for that, I recommend CORMOSIA, the Committee on Research Materials on Southeast Asia. This is a group of 17 institutions, including Cornell, that have Southeast Asia library collections in the United States. So when searching for digitized collections, rather than beginning your search on the internet at large or on Google, you should visit the CORMOSIA website, where we have a list of all of these institutions' library websites. And starting there at this more targeted point can help you to zoom in your search and to reduce a lot of the noise that you might have if you just had a more undefined starting point. The CORMOSIA website also has a list of aggregated research guides. So this list of resources all in one place combines the knowledge of every major Southeast Asia librarian in the US. And their contact information is there as well. So if you're still having trouble, you've now got a list of numerous experts to reach out to. And CORMOSIA is working to aggregate not just their research guides, but their digital collections as well, right? To solve this entire problem of digital siloing. The Southeast Asia Digital Library is a shared repository hosted by Northern Illinois University. It's a place where digital projects from all CORMOSIA members can be stored together on a single platform, so that you as a user can search and browse across all these items as a unit, rather than having to find them on multiple different websites. CEDL, as we call it, currently contains 20 digital projects, with 4 more in the pipeline. That's over 9,000 items, 9,000 primary source items, representing every country in the region excepting Brunei at this point. Our content includes maps, manuscripts, books, oral histories, television shows, photographs, just this wealth of information and primary sources from and about Southeast Asia. CEDL is a model for how libraries can work together to make online research easier and more intuitive for you, the researchers. So if you're looking for primary sources on Southeast Asia, start here with CEDL's collections. And if you can't find what you're looking for there, comb through the CORMOSIA member digital collections. And if by then you're still having trouble, send one of us an email. If we don't have what you're interested in ourselves, odds are if it's been digitized, we know where to find it. So thank you all, and I look forward to answering your questions later.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily. And now we move on to our second presentation with Joshua Kueh and Ryan Wolfson-Ford.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be with you today. And thanks for the opportunity to speak about accessing Southeast Asian resources at the Library of Congress. So today, my colleague Ryan Wolfson-Ford and I will be covering a range of topics. And oops, sorry, Ryan's just bringing up our slides here. So if you would just give us a minute, sorry. Ryan, would you like me to share screen then? Okay, sorry, if you just give us a second. I hope you can see the screen now. Okay, so right. So we'll give you a brief introduction to the Asian Reading Room and the Southeast Asian Collection at the library. Then we'll talk about the International Collections blog and Facebook page, as well as web archives and digitized items. And we'll also explain how to search for library material, how to access and use library material remotely, Then we'll go over the library's e-resources, sorry. Library's e-resources. And we'll also look at some Southeast Asian research guides. So we have quite a few things to cover, so let's just jump straight into it. So the Library of Congress Southeast Asian Collection is based at the Asian Division, which is one of 4 international divisions. The other 3 are the African and Middle Eastern Division, the Hispanic Division, and the European Division. So each of these divisions has its own reading room, which is the place to access material in languages of the respective regions. For example, Asian language materials are for the most part in the care of the Asian Division, and users can request such items at the Asian Reading Room. The hours of the Asian Reading Room under normal circumstances are listed in the slide. So for now, however, reading rooms are closed to the public, but please check loc.gov for updates on when the library will reopen to the public. For more information on the Asian Reading Room, also please visit the newly redesigned Asian Reading Room website. And the website has lots of great information on using the room, collections, news and events, as well as fellowships. We have travel grants to come visit us. All right, let me just switch to this next slide. Okay, so having highlighted the Asian Reading Room, I'd like to return to the Southeast Asian collection. The Southeast Asian collection includes the first Asian language works acquired by the Library of Congress. In 1866, the first Asian texts were transferred to the library from the Smithsonian Institution. These were a collection of Malay and Bugis texts acquired by the Wilkes expedition, which traveled to various parts of Southeast Asia, including Singapore. The Wilkes expedition, also known as the U.S. Exploring Expedition, lasted from 1838 to 1842 and was an early U.S. scientific mission to the Pacific. It was led by Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, a stern, aloof figure obsessed with his mission of exploration, who some say was the inspiration for the literary character Captain Ahab in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The expedition reached Singapore in 1842 and acquired Malay and Bugis texts with the help of the American missionary Alfred North. These included a collection of 19th century Malay letters, mainly from Malay rulers, to the first British resident of Singapore that make up the library's William Farquhar correspondence collection that's online. And then we also have a copy of the Hikayat Abdullah, written by Munshi Abdullah bin Abdul Qadir, who incidentally was the teacher of Alfred North. We also have several Bugis volumes. It was not until after World War II that the Southeast Asia collection developed rapidly. It grew especially during the Cold War and post-colonial period as the US government sought knowledge about Southeast Asia and became concerned about rising communism in the region. Library-wide, there are over 370,000 Southeast Asian titles in more than 100 languages in different formats: books, journals, rare books, manuscripts, maps, newspapers, music scores, films, and sound recordings, to name a few. The bulk of this Southeast Asian material is at the Asian Division. However, Southeast Asian items can also be found in other parts of the library. So I've included some images in the slide to give you an idea of what can be found at other reading rooms. So in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division, researchers will find the Doctrina Cristiana, which is the oldest known printed book in the Philippines. And then at the Prints and Photographs reading room, you'll find images of Southeast Asia, such as the one of late 19th century Singapore picture. The Geography and Map reading room holds many maps in Southeast Asia, like the Ming Dynasty map shown. All this is to say that there's Southeast Asian material at both the Asian Division and other parts of the library. So to know what's available and where to find it, please consult the newly published Southeast Asian Collection Research Guide. This guide, which is available online, provides an introduction to the Southeast Asian collection, which is accessible in the Asian Reading Room of the Library of Congress. It also highlights other relevant Southeast Asian materials which may be found in libraries over 20 reading rooms and research centers that provide research space and guidance for users to interact with items based on subject or format. In addition to this guide, I'd like to point you to a couple of other resources to stay updated on Southeast Asian related matters at the library, as well as other international collections topics. I would like to draw your attention to a couple of social media resources. So since 2016, the library's international collections have joined together to produce 2 social media resources, the Four Corners of the World blog and the Library of Congress International Collections Facebook page. Both resources feature contributions from the Asian, African, and Middle Eastern, European, and Hispanic divisions. The blog features longer form writing on subjects and stories told through our collections. Recent posts on Four Corners have looked at Malay letters at the library, the Japanese rare book digital collection, Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman calligraphy sheets at the library, the collection of Trans-Siberian Railway postcards, and Latina luminaries. So new blogs are typically published every week. The Facebook page is updated more frequently with both news of upcoming lectures, orientations, and webinars, as well as exciting new acquisitions and digital resources. Both the blog and the Facebook page are good ways to keep current on what's happening with the library's international collections. Since I've mentioned the blog, I would like to point to an excellent post by a South Asia reference librarian on online services and resources for international collections at the Library of Congress. This will be particularly relevant for those doing remote research. Please don't worry about copying the link. Ryan and I have actually put together a list of links that appear in this presentation that we will share with you. I've already emailed that to Cheng Wang, and I believe he'll help share that. Okay. Web archives. So web archives are another important resource in Southeast Asia. Web archives contain web pages that have been preserved from the internet, and the library's Jakarta office, which incidentally acquires most of the library's Southeast Asian items, has been collecting Southeast Asian websites since 2009. And there is a strong collection on Southeast Asian elections. Other archives focus on a theme or event such as the Thai King Bhumipon's funeral or COVID-19. Information on how to access these web archives is available in the Southeast Asia Collection Research Guide, and I've also listed a link there. All right, the Southeast Asia Collection includes a growing number of items that have been digitized. Recently, digitized collections include the William Farquhar Correspondence Collection. Other digital items include the oldest printed work from Southeast Asia that I mentioned earlier, the Doctrina Christiana. We also have completely digitized works like a 19th century Javanese Islamic manuscript and an 18th century Burmese Buddhist manuscript. Other items from the collection are in the process of being digitized. All right, so now I'll hand over to Ryan so he can cover the next few sections of our presentation.
Hello, I'm Ryan Wolfson-Ford. I'd like to say a few words about the library's online catalog, OPAC. The most important thing to remember is when searching for material in Southeast Asian languages, especially those which use a non-Latin script like Thai or Burmese or Khmer or Lao, you need to enter your search queries using the LC romanization table specific to your language. Library records have been romanized according to the library's own transcription system, which often differs from what is used in academia. You won't be able to find optimal results for items in those languages unless you search using the library's romanization tables. The online public access catalog, OPAC, can be useful, but it also has some idiosyncrasies. For example, it will time out if left alone for 5 minutes, and the interface is a little clunky. But for any record, on the right, you can see an example of an OPAC record. You can see the author, the title, the publishing information. There are additional options. For one, there's a request item button. For that, you actually need a reader's card, which is just sort of a Library of Congress library card, which you have to get in public or in person. So for people working remotely, it's best to just request the item through interlibrary loan. But you can also check the item availability, which will jump to the bottom of the page, and it will show you where the item is held. If you see it's say Fort Meade or Cabin Branch or Landover, those are library offsite storage facilities. So if you're coming in person and you would like to use the item, keep in mind that there may be a day or two wait while it's transferred. You can also email or print the record. And I think the best way to come back to the record, though, is to use the LCCN permalink, which is in the bottom left corner of the OPAC record, highlighted there. And that is the best way to return to the record later. And it will work a lot better than trying to use what's in your URL box, which might not work. You can also search from loc.gov, which is the library homepage, and it has a search bar you'll see on the homepage, and there's a drop-down box to the left of that search bar, which will let you specify what format to search in. loc.gov has the same results as OPAC, but with a more updated look and an interface that is a bit more user-friendly. And as you can see from the example search I have, you can specify it by items that are available online only. So that can be good for working remotely. There are a number of ways to refine your search. On the left-hand side, there are a number of options. One option that I like is called part of, and that will let you specify specific divisions within the library, like the prints and photographs division, geography and maps, or the law library, all of which can have a lot of Southeast Asian material there. For searching for images, the Prints and Photographs Division maintains its own search site, loc.gov/pictures, and they recommend people to use this to search to get the best results for images at the library. One feature they have in their search engine is an option to include variants on spelling. So you can search for Thailand and get results for Siam. So it helps save time. For other search tips, you can check out our Southeast Asia Collection Guide, which was recently published. Normally, the main way to access library items remotely is to borrow them via interlibrary loan, although during the pandemic, that service has been put on hold, and the library's own ILL department is only serving digital items, not physical items. And we hope that will change soon as more libraries open up. But when that's not working, we have been recommending people to try the library's duplication service. That involves a cost, but it can be a way to get something that you can't otherwise get. And they have a website listed here that will give you a list of prices and how to order. They are limited by copyright, but otherwise they can send you a scan of something through as a PDF. They can, copy things. They can even copy microfilm reel. So it's an option to think of. There's also a library electronic online resources catalog. That is a collection of external websites that are resources for users. It includes sites that are databases that contain a lot of information, and it also includes more specific sites like the Center for Hmong Studies website. Joshua and I have been working to add Southeast Asia specific sites to this catalog, but the process has been a little bit slow. But one thing to keep in mind is these electronic resources. When you're searching through this catalog, the results that appear here do not appear in OPAC or loc.gov. They're totally separate. So that's something to keep in mind. They're a little less discoverable, but there's less processing time, I think, by just keeping it self-contained. But you don't have to navigate the electronic resources catalog yourself. The Asian Division created a research guide of free electronic resources. That includes the Southeast Asia specific page that includes a curated list of freely available electronic resources. It also lists our subscription databases, which have to be used on site for when you're able to come research in person. Joshua and I are working on developing a number of research guides for our collection. We recently released two guides, one on the Southeast Asia collection itself and another on the William Farquhar correspondence. And we look forward to adding more. The most important guide would have to be our collection guide, which gives an overview of materials, Southeast Asian materials in the Asian division and in other different divisions of the library. And it's really a great place to start looking for Southeast Asia materials at the library. Lastly, I'll say to please feel free to get in touch with either Joshua or I. We are the points of contact for any Southeast Asia research questions at the library. And so we're happy to field any question you have, however small or big you have. So you can contact us by email. There's also the Ask a Librarian service, which will automatically route to us. But either way, if you're interested in using Southeast Asian material at the library, please talk to us. We're happy to talk with you. We're excited to help you in your research. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan and Joshua. And before going on to our next speaker, I want to circle back to our first presenters because Jeffrey Petersen has arrived after some technical difficulties and would like to add something to that presentation. So thank you, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
Thank you. How's my audio? Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I've had a number of technical problems, so you'll just have to bear with me. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm going to try and work through what I can after some of the difficulties I've had here. But I'm just going to quickly go over a few things. I was going to go before Emily, but I'm just going to kind of follow up on some of that. So if I can go ahead and share screen here. Okay. Just a moment. Okay, is that coming through okay? Great. I'm having some trouble toggling between my slides in my browser, but I'm just going to do the best I can here. So as mentioned, my name is Jeff Petersen, and I'm the Southeast Asia Librarian at Cornell University. And I'm just excited to have this opportunity to talk to you about our resources. I've been asked to focus a little bit on what we at Cornell have, what we can offer, but the primary emphasis on the digital resources. So things that you need to know. Well, first of all, for those of you in the region, we're fortunate to have a great Southeast Asia Center here at Cornell. And in fact, we have what is widely regarded as one of the best or the best collections on Southeast Asia in the world, as far as the library goes. And so that's the first thing that you should know. We have a lot of strengths because years ago, dedicated efforts were made by individuals like John Echols and Jacques Kueh, the librarian, to build up a fantastic collection, to build up a comprehensive collection. And really, it's a world-class treasure. So if you remember nothing else from this, remember that we're here and we're very happy to help you. So my email is up, as you can see on the screen. Don't hesitate to contact me. I started off as an undergrad at an institution that wasn't one of the major Southeast Asia centers. So I know what it's like to perhaps be disconnected, not in the loop, and not to have resources on hand. And what I didn't know was how willing librarians at other institutions would be to help me. So it's tragic when I find out that someone is working on something and doesn't know about something important that we have, or doesn't know about a database that relates to their area. So we have databases that are specific, say, to the Philippines or to Thailand, or digital resources of that nature. So what I'm going to just go over very quickly, and I don't have time to talk about as many things as I would like, is I'm just going to go over some examples of what I call some homebrewed resources here that are available online to everyone. Now, Southeast Asia is so diverse and there's so many countries that we can't get everyone at once. But you may find something here for you. And if you don't, we likely have it. You know, if it's not listed here, we likely have something that can contribute to your work. So what I want to talk to you about briefly are some of the, first of all, show you our website very briefly, which is a work in progress. So forgive that, we're working out some bugs still. But in addition, we do have these live guides that we've created, which are very helpful for getting you started when doing work on Southeast Asia. We also have, and I believe Emily alluded to this, we also have something that we call Karma, which is a collection of materials that we've digitized at Cornell. So images and so forth, and that's a really good place to go. And let me remind you, I'm going through quickly. If you want to know where these things are, where to find them, just contact me afterwards, and I'll be happy to do that. We also have something called Southeast Asia Visions. We have the Claire Holt collection. We have something called the Southeast Asia Book Chapter Bibliography. And we have more live guides such as general statistics sources for Asia. So I'm going to do a little toggling here. I'm having trouble doing this, but there we go. Very brief overview of our website. Right now is a great time to learn about the collection because we have an online exhibit called Building a Collection, Jack Kueh and the John M. Echols collection. It's going to tell you about the history, how we built this, and the fantastic efforts that went into this collection. So I'm only going to point at that. But what I want to show you is that we have a general Southeast Asia page, and then we have pages for each of the countries. And so one of the things, if you know, you may be a seasoned researcher, just trying to overturn stones and find what you haven't found yet. You may be beginning, and you may be asking yourself, okay, well, where do I start? I'm starting with a country, I'm starting with a topic. We're trying to address that. Some of our other colleagues are, for example, in other areas. But work in progress, if, for example, you go click on Indonesia, say you're interested in Indonesia, we've got a little paragraph that's going to help get you started. It's recommending some books that will give you an introduction on how to do research in the country. So, for example, there's the Historical Dictionary of Indonesia that was written by our own Audrey Kane. In there, she has a number of works that she recommends. She has an introduction that talks about where the major archival centers are in the world, and so on. We also have a little tip towards the Indonesia Reader, History, Culture, and Politics by Eric Teklikotso, and other good books to start with. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, well, that's great. That gives me a little something on a country. What about a theme? I'm working across regions. I want to know about gender. I want to know about politics. So that's where we also have some of these live guides. If my computer will cooperate, I'll show them to you quickly. This is a good one because what we've done here is it's an introduction, and we've gone to experts. We've gone to professors in certain topics, and we've said, hey, can you give us some good startup books? Can you give us some key readings? Because one of the things you'll find with the Echols collection is that if you just start searching for stuff, you will find thousands and thousands of books and articles. So knowing where to start is really helpful. So you could go, for example, to Cold War, and we had some very helpful recommendations on Southeast Asia and the Cold War and so forth. Okay, now for the sake of time, let me jump ahead here and just show you Karma, what we call Karma really quickly, which again, these are things that have been digitized and are available to everyone at Cornell. You can see that there's about 4,000 items to go through here. Again, hopefully something for everyone. Moving on, let me show you something I mentioned before, which is Southeast Asia Visions. Now what that is that these are Western travel accounts of people who went to Southeast Asia. So we've got about 350 books scanning a long period of time, and they're just full text, they're PDF, you can search through them, you can search for images, and a lot of people find that to be really handy. We also have other things such as the Claire Holt papers. So Claire Holt was an important professor dealing with art in Indonesia, and she influenced Ben Anderson. And so we have a digital collection of works and paintings that was done for the Cornell Indonesian Arts Project. So, this is a fantastic thing to look at if you're dealing with fine arts in Indonesia. Now, I was also nudged, people nudged me to mention something I created myself. It's a little bit of a curious Frankenstein thing, but I call this the Southeast Asia Book Chapter Bibliography. Now, this isn't where you go to start. This may be where you go to finish. But just so that you know that it's here, what I'm doing is I'm taking edited volumes And I'm pulling out chapters in those edited volumes that deal with Southeast Asia. And the idea is to try to find ones that are hidden. So for example, I have one here. So we have the Oxford Handbook of Case. Well, there's something about Laos in there. Or this book, Questions of Nationalism and Cultural Identities in Present-Day Asia. There's something specific to Southeast Asia in that book. So I'm pulling it out so you can find it. And you can see you can filter by country. You can filter by topic. So again, I can only allude to this. I can describe it better in person, but just be aware that that's here. You may find something that is just not indexed in any catalog. You might find something that will surprise you here. More examples of live guides. So we have great strengths in the humanities. We also have stuff on the social sciences, the sciences. We really try to get what we can. And a question that we often get is a question about statistics in Asia. And here's a live guide that's devoted to that. Okay, now, in addition, I'd like to talk a little bit about other material that's available. However, for this material, you would need to be on site. Now, I want to mention that even though we're focused on what's available electronically, you should know what's also here, what we subscribe to, for a couple of reasons. One, here in Central New York, many of you may be able to visit us when things open up again. We strongly encourage you to do that. But number two, if you know that we have it, we can help search for you, even if you can't get here. So I'll show you in a moment. We have a number of archival collections, of course, and we have a page that will tell you what the major ones are for Southeast Asia. We also have CIPPA, which is a database focused just on the Philippines. It's taking all these periodicals and all these indexes and just kind of showing you, it's searching for all those through all of those at once. Now, even if you can't get here to use it, you can ask me to help run searches for you. We have Perin, a database just devoted to Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. We have other collected works we purchased, like US Intelligence on Asia, and those are declassified documents that have been opened up. We have handbooks, like I showed before, well, historical dictionaries, like the one I showed before. We have handbooks, like Oxford handbooks, Rutgers handbooks. What these are is they give you a theoretical overview on a certain topic in Asia or Southeast Asia. Just kind of gets you up to speed on the latest debates. We subscribe to Oxford Bibliographies Online. Now, Oxford Bibliographies Online cover a wide range of topics, but they also have some on Southeast Asia. What's great about those is an expert has gone through, and this is what's great about a bibliography. They have gone through and they have told you what the key works are, which ones are the best ones to look at, and so on. They evaluate them. So again, with bibliographies, don't reinvent the wheel. Some poor librarian has worn their life away searching for these things for you. Take advantage of that. Also, packages like Adam Matthews publications, lots of cool stuff. So these are archival things that have been made available online. Cold War in the Pacific, they have another one on Vietnam from the perspective of the British Islands of Great Britain. And although those are the things, some of the things we have at Cornell, also if you contact us, we may just know of something else out there that's hosted by somebody else that's good to know about, that we want you to know about. I'm going to run through the list very quickly. We have the Bibliography of Asian Studies, which you should know about. That's a major database for searching for things on Asia. There's a Bibliography of Performing Arts in the East. There's Thailand Theses and Journal Index. That's a database devoted to materials just on Thailand, articles on Thailand. There's the online Myanmar Library. Bibliotheca Camerica for Cambodia. Thai manuscripts online. Wisconsin hosts the Southeast Asian Images and Text Project. Penn hosts a guide digital resources on Southeast Asian archaeology. And that's just dangling what we can tell you about. There's just far more. So we really hope that you will contact us. Now, I think I have just a minute or two. I did want to show this guide here. So here's an example of one of our guides to our archival collections that you can find on our website. I chose the Dallas Decker collection, a fantastic collection of photographs throughout Indonesia. And what this does, this guide tells you gives you an overview. It tells you what's in each box. So if you can get here, that's great. If you can't get here, you can contact us and say, hey, could I get a scan of something from one of these archival collections? So that's just a lightning round kind of opportunity to get a glimpse of what we have. The other thing that I would say, I don't really know that I have much time for this, that I really wanted to emphasize is that I hope that you learn to use WorldCat if you're not familiar with it. WorldCat is collecting catalogs from around the world. It's putting it all into one catalog. It's a very powerful search tool. And what you can do if you learn how to do this, if you learn the code for each library and you learn how to search this properly, you can run a search specific to Cornell. And what the results do is the results take the most widely held book first in the returns. And then as you go down, they become increasingly scarce. What that means is that you can see what the rare things are at Cornell and in the Echols collection. And you can see what the unique things are if you learn how to do this. Not only that, if you learn these library codes, you can compare the holdings of one library to another. So you can say, tell me what's at Cornell that's, say, not at my home institution. That way you know what to focus in on. So I only have, I can only allude to this. I'd be happy to show you how to do all those things. But I think I'm probably about out of time. So thank you for allowing me to just kind of do this lightning round with you. And the most important thing is, contact us. I'm at jwp42@cornell.edu. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm glad you could join us. That was great. And now I'll turn it over to Pamela McElwee, who will be talking about adapting research plans in the face of adversity.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here today to talk about various problems in research and so forth. Unfortunately, this is something I'm a bit of an expert on through the course of my career. And for those of us that work in Southeast Asia, I think often the exception is the norm. So storms that wash away the access road to your field site, or visas that are no longer being granted by an authority. Unfortunately, this is kind of commonplace in Southeast Asia for various reasons. And so we have to build in ways to adapt around those. And some of the best advice I have been able to give people who find themselves in these situations is to be flexible and always give yourself more time than you think you need. So whenever students tell me they're going to make a quick 2-week trip to Southeast Asia, I say, nope, you're not going to do that because inevitably something will happen. And that 2 weeks that you think you need to get one simple interview or one thing is going to turn into 3 weeks or 4 weeks because you're waiting for somebody to give you permission to get into an archive, or you're waiting for someone to stamp your paper, or you're waiting for something else. So I always try to tell people to build in time for waiting. And the lovely thing about Southeast Asia is that time that you spend waiting, you will be also learning. You will be sitting and drinking tea with the archivists. You will be in a field site waiting for the village head man to suss you out. And in the meantime, you're learning a lot along the way. So in my own experience, I've had to live this. And so when I was a dissertation student at Yale, it was sort of the first cohort of people in the 1990s who were doing first American cohort doing fieldwork in Vietnam, again, after Vietnam had been closed off for so many years. And so inevitably there were barriers and problems. A lot of people couldn't get permission to go out to where they wanted to go. At the time, most people, this was like mid 1990s, most people were restricted to the cities. I am an environmental scientist. And so I do a lot of work in more remote areas. And I was able to get access to remote areas in the year 2000. I was originally going to Vietnam to study the impact of expansion of coffee plantations on different ethnic minority communities in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And I was there. I was based in the Central Highlands for about 9 months. And there was a uprising, it's quite the right word, but a lot of protests against the government, against the expansion of coffee plantations, and my permission was revoked after 9 months. And so and my work wasn't done. And so the question then became, do you leave with 9 months worth of work? Or do you agree to switch topics and do something else potentially for a while? And so that was my dilemma. And I decided to stay. It took longer. I ended up doing 2.5 years of field work when I meant to do 1.5 years. And lots of people do this. So hopefully you can build some flexibility. And I was really lucky that the timing of all this bad luck on my end managed to push me to apply for more grants. And so the timing was just right that I applied for another grant to stay for another year, and it worked out. But you have to kind of have these things in the back of your mind, like, when are the NSFs going to be due again? When is university funding going to be due again if you have to extend the time that you're doing work? And so I switched field sites. And so I was able to get permission to go to a different part of Vietnam that didn't have coffee and didn't have ethnic minorities. So you can imagine, if that was my original plan, that was initially quite devastating to have to pick up and do something completely different. I think it turned out fine in the end. I changed topics. I started working more on protected areas and the problem of biodiversity conservation, which was implicit in studying deforestation and coffee. But instead of focusing mostly on the coffee, I focused instead on the deforestation, which sadly happens just about everywhere in Southeast Asia. So it wasn't a problem to find a new place where that was happening. But think about it in different ways and with a different community. And eventually in postdoc work, I was able to get back into thinking about Indigenous communities and ethnic minorities and the impact that they've had on various places in Vietnam. So it wasn't a complete waste of time of my original project, and I've been able to get back to it over time. And as if that wasn't enough, like many of you, I had 2 grants to be in Southeast Asia starting of March of last year. And one of them was to do archival research in Washington, D.C. in the National Archives, which has been closed since March 2020. And the other one was to be in Southeast Asia, working in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Burma. And given the COVID restrictions on travel, all of those have been completely disrupted. Luckily, like many of you, some of my work, I can do interviews on Zoom if people have access to computers and so forth. And so I've actually done that. It wasn't in the original plan, but I've done Zoom interviews with people in Southeast Asia over the past year, those that we could agree to get on Zoom. And it's been a surprising number of people who are happy to do that and not do interviews in person. And so we've been able to record a lot of those in all 3 countries, actually, that we were working in until recently in Burma. And unfortunately, I wish I had better news. My collaborators in Burma are sort of hunkering down and staying low, as many of your collaborators probably are as well. But it just goes to show that these things are utterly unpredictable, and we don't necessarily know what we're going to be able to do. And so for the Burma part of my project, my main concern has been keeping my collaborators safe and off the streets. And so they have not been doing interviews recently because of that. So the best advice, I can give to anyone is to build in the ability to do something different, whether it's switching your interviews to Zoom if you can, reversing the order that you meant to do things. We were actually going to do policymaker interviews towards the end of our project and start with some local level household-based interviews in Southeast Asia. And so it was going to be much too hard to do the household surveys on Zoom, but the policymakers was much more feasible. So we reversed the order of things. Found new people that we might not have found otherwise because we were restricted by having to do it all by Zoom. So just being as flexible as possible, looking for help from as many people as you can, not being afraid to tell funding agencies that you're not going to be able to do what you said you were going to do, and get extensions, no cost extensions, which is definitely going to happen to me this year. I will say the NSF in particular has been wonderful about this. They know that we're all potentially delayed because of COVID and various travel restrictions and so forth. So my experience with funders has been very positive, and hopefully everyone else will have the same experience. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions that people might have, but if nothing else, you are not alone. This is something that we go through continuously as researchers, and we have to make the best of it, form a community, help one another out, and keep our collaborators safe as best as we can.
Okay, thanks. And Karen has just had to leave for another appointment. So I will take over her moderating duties. So we turn now to our final panelist, Charmaine Willis. And then just so everyone knows, after that, we will have plenty of time for Q&A. You're welcome either to put questions in the chat, either to everyone or just to me. And you can start doing that at any point. Or since we wanted to make this feel more like an actual network of humans, so you are welcome to ask your question live, just unmute yourself. So I will ask, because I can't see everyone on one page, just if you want to be on the queue, just raise your digital hand and I'll just keep a queue going. All right, Charmaine.
All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for having me. So today I'm talking a bit about my own experience with COVID and just having to pivot my own research here. Let's see. All right, so just a couple of points about just generally, dealing with COVID, how to do research, how to pivot your research there. So first, I will just mention my own research project and kind of where I was when the pandemic started, to kind of help you understand my own position in this. But of course, everyone's experiences are probably different here. Some key questions that I think are really useful in thinking about how you can kind of change your research project, especially, if you're talking about dissertation work, and certainly questions that have been helpful for me. Thinking about how to pivot the actual data that I use, so switching data types, and then also thinking about how to change your data collection, how you might go about doing that. And then I will end talking about virtual interviews. So my own research, I look at both Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, focusing on US-based politics in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. I'm looking at protest movements in these three countries and looking at variation across various different host communities. So it's important for me to note that I've done previous fieldwork in 2 of my sites. So one being the Philippines, and I was there for about 6 weeks, and then 5 weeks in Japan. So I was able, before the pandemic, to actually go to these research sites, which is an important thing to note here. I have a lot of different data that I'm using, but interviews is the primary reason why I was going into the field for data collection. So when, of course, so many of us are in this, experience where either our dissertation projects are derailed in some way, or just generally our research projects. So what are kind of the things we should think about in terms of altering our research plan? First of all, I think first key question is, what information can we get outside of the field? Are there things that we originally thought we really want to go do in the field and gather from the field, but are there resources that we can get outside of the field? And then kind of conversely thinking about what information do we have to get from the field that we really cannot get outside of it? And then kind of to the second question, are there ways to get this information remotely from the field? So I will say, I think that if there is some kind of silver lining about the pandemic, I mean, even this is arguable, but I think these kind of issues really helping us as researchers to really think about not just conditions like the pandemic, but also times where the field is just inaccessible for a variety of different reasons. There might be different health concerns within a particular country versus this global pandemic, but also things like, violent conflict erupting where we really can't predict it happening. So generally, there's a lot of different circumstances where our research might be disrupted. So thinking about, as I mentioned here, pivoting your data. So this question of what information can you get outside of the field? Can you switch the type of data that you need to use for your research? So I've actually found this question and thinking about it being really helpful for my project, because it's really causing me to reflect on what I actually need, what evidence am I really looking for here. And so you might find some of these questions useful in terms of thinking about other data types that you might be able to get outside of the field. So for example, we've had this two really excellent presentations about archival data and sources that are available, depending on where the field is for you, but typically outside the field. So is it possible for you to use archival data in your research? And then related to this question, is that data available in your country? So in the US, obviously we have some really great options for archival data, but also some cases, as we've also heard, it's also possible to get them remotely. There's digitized archival data available. So those are some great ways, depending on your research, that you can kind of pivot your project. Another sort of related question, can you use digital media for your data? So things like, of course, online, journals or newspapers, getting articles from there. But also, as we all know, what's increasingly being used are social media posts. So things like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc., other platforms as well. Those might be good sources of data for your project. Can you use websites? I think, at least for myself, that's something that I really overlooked when I started off my project. Obviously, we all like going to the field, doing interviews, that kind of thing. But these actually can be really good sources of information as well. So to give you an example of what I ended up doing, because like so many other people, my fieldwork has been disrupted by this pretty significantly. One really great source has been actually websites like the US consulate website or US military websites, where typically I would want to go do elite interviews, but I was able to pivot and use websites to get basically the same information. I also found that in the cases where I was able to do interviews before the pandemic, I was referred to actually the same sources anyway. So of course, it would be nice to do interviews, but this also can substitute for those interviews or augment the interviews that I already have. So in terms of changing the way that you collect the data, so again, this other question of what information do you have to get from the field? We're talking, of course, a lot about archival data. So there's some times where, of course, we can't get archival data in person. It might be in our field site that's not digitized, or for some other reason, it's not available remotely. Sometimes, of course, interviews, we can't necessarily get them remotely. And I'll talk about, again, the process of virtual interviews in a second. Focus groups might be another reason why we're trying to go to the field. Surveys. And just an example of a type of data that I really needed to get in a particular form, but I had to change the way that I did the data collection. So thinking about, for me, trying to get information from anti-base activists about their strategies that they're using that I really can't get in things like pamphlets or websites or social media. So I really needed to do interviews, and I had to think about a different way for me to go about doing that. So again, related to this other question, this idea of, can we get this data remotely? Are there ways to get data that normally we'd go to the field for, but can we get it remotely in some form? So what was mentioned previously, this idea of interlocutors. So basically having some kind of partner researchers in your field site that you can rely on for a variety of different things. I haven't used this myself, but I've certainly heard of researchers doing this. So doing things like helping you get access to archives in your field site, perhaps conducting surveys, focus groups, interviews. Of course, these are also constrained by the conditions related to COVID on the ground in those sites as well. So something to keep in mind there. There's also this option, again, depending on the type of data that you need for your project, of remote data collection. So surveys, of course, there's so many survey platforms these days. Amazon MTurk is one of them. That might be an option depending on your target population, access to internet, that kind of thing. Focus groups, I haven't done these myself, but I could see some kind of use of digital platforms like Slack, which is kind of more of a chat room style digital app that you might use for something like a focus group. I think you could also use Zoom for that kind of thing as well. And then, as was mentioned, this idea of virtual, like remote interviews. And there's a lot of different ways that one might go about doing this. I think, and this is what I used, Zoom is probably the most common platform these days to do that. But of course, there's Google Meet, Skype, WhatsApp, even as a millennial, I feel weird saying it, but also phone interviews are an option as well. So a lot of different ways that we might do interviews remotely. So in terms of virtual interviews and some of the pros and cons to doing this, I think, of course, there's a lot of reasons why doing them in person is preferable, but I think there are some benefits to it as well and some good reasons to use it. So in terms of the cons of virtual interviews, I think, in political science in general, but certainly area studies, we as a community will have to think about, whether or not these types of data collection really count as quote unquote field work. I think right now, of course, we all have this awareness of the way that COVID is really impacting our field work. Down the road, what will that mean? What will that look like? Will people think of it the same way? Who knows? It remains to be seen, but that's certainly something to take into consideration. As was mentioned earlier as well, one of the cons certainly is that, if we're on the ground, we might be able to get access to sites that are more rural, or, respondents might have no or unstable access to internet or phone, for example. So if we're using just remote interviews, we might be cut off from people who really don't have access to internet or phone. And I think especially depending on where we're talking about in Southeast Asia, that can definitely be a limitation. So as I mentioned before, I've kind of converted to doing the virtual interviews after already being in the field for a little bit. So I've had a network that I can kind of rely on to get other interviews. People know who I am. Other people can speak to me, so that goes to my credibility. But I think that if you have not yet been in the field, it is a little bit more challenging to get interviews where people don't necessarily know who you are. You don't really have a network on the ground. So really can, I think, inhibit that kind of snowball sampling that we often do in this type of research. I think too, as we kind of move towards more of these virtual interviews, there might be questions about anonymity in terms of, is the internet connection stable? Is there a way for someone to Zoom bomb or something like that and identify who your interviewee is? Of course, it depends more or less on the type of research you're doing, but there's certainly an ethical component there that I think we need to think more about as a field. And then finally, especially those of us doing research in Southeast Asia, there's huge time differences between, depending on where you are in the US or where you are in your host country, there can be huge time differences between you and your interviewee. So you might be doing interviews at really bizarre times. I will say for myself, COVID has really messed up my sleep schedule. So I'm up late anyway, which has been helpful in terms of doing interviews in the Philippines, where there's about 12, 13-hour difference. But that's definitely something to take into consideration when you're scheduling virtual interviews or wanting to do something like that. At the same time, I've actually enjoyed doing them for a lot of reasons. I think there's a lot of pros to doing virtual interviews. So I think on the one hand, they're less time consuming just inherently in the sense of you're not traveling to a site to meet someone to conduct an interview. And related to that, I think, in some cases, it's probably safer for both the researcher and certainly right now for the participants not to meet in person, obviously because of COVID, but also especially depending on the researcher's identity or participant identity, it can definitely be just safer for meeting in person in general. Myself, I find myself much less fatigued after doing these types of interviews than when I was doing in-person interviews. That being said, I can probably fit in more virtual interviews than I could when I was in person. As someone who I don't record typically, I take notes by hand when I do interviews in person. It's easier to obviously type notes when you're doing a virtual interview. It's much more organic in the sense of you're on your computer anyway. You can kind of type as you're listening to the interviewer. I don't have to worry about converting my handwritten notes to type notes. This really, of course, depends on your own particular style of interviewing and recording. But for me, it's actually saved a lot of time in doing it that way. I think in general, again, not being someone who records their interviews, in some sense, it's more organic to record something like a Zoom interview. Of course, you want to get consent before you do that and all of those things. But I think it might be a less of a barrier in the sense of not having, a recorder in between you and your respondent. And that, I think that can create some kind of tension. So it might be more organic in that sense. And then, as was mentioned earlier, and I found this as well, respondents generally seem to be more open to remote interviews than they even were pre-pandemic. So to give you an example, before the pandemic started, I was trying to interview a US official in one of my field sites, and they said, well, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to meet while you're here. So, next time you're in country, we'll interview each other, or you'll interview us. And after the pandemic started, I contacted them again and they said, okay, yeah, we can do a Zoom interview. So you might actually find that people are more willing to do remote interviews, especially as opposed to pre-pandemic. I think just kind of ending on this, this question, this concept, when we think too about virtual interviews, I think there's this idea that these respondents are not necessarily embedded in the same way as we'd see them if we're doing in-person interviews. But I think we're seeing more of a conversation around this idea of digital embeddedness as these types of research become more common with the pandemic. So this idea of really thinking about, even in the virtual format, they're kind of embedded in a particular context, and us doing virtual interviews kind of allows us, even so, to glimpse this kind of context that they're embedded in. So Howlett mentions this in a recent article, and I've kind of experienced this in my own research as well. So thinking about questions like, where are you interviewing the respondents? That can give you some clues about who they are, their environment, why they might be interviewing you, or you might be interviewing them from a certain area. Thinking about also who and what are in the background. So for example, for myself, I was interviewing an activist a few months ago, and I heard a military helicopter flying overhead during their interview. I think that's probably something I would have, when I was in person as well, but it also carried, through to the virtual interview to the extent that we needed to pause and wait for it to finish. So that definitely, I still got context there. And then Howlett in her recent article also mentions this idea of interviewees kind of bringing in their family members or pets into their Zoom call, which is also some interesting information about them and their identities as well. Again, related to the kind of my initial point here, there's a question of whether or not this sort of digital embeddedness is comparable to in-person research, or is it the same kind of information that we would get if we were in person going to offices or different sites to interview people. But I think it is a really interesting question, and we'll see kind of more conversation about these types of things as we end up doing more and more virtual research. So that being said, I look forward to any comments or questions you might have.
Okay, great. Thanks. And thanks to all our panelists. So please feel free, anyone, to raise hands digitally, it will be easier to see. Or if I'm not seeing a hand, just shout, unmute and shout. So I will, since I'm seeing a lull at the moment, and I should also say this, if you are a graduate student and feel shy to ask, don't feel shy. This panel is for anyone who is here. So please feel free to speak up. But I want to start with 2 questions for any of the librarians here, as somebody who is, like probably everyone else here, a big fan of libraries and digital collections in particular, especially being at a university without a Southeast Asia collection. So one would be, I'm wondering if there are ways for those who are collecting materials or who are doing research on niche areas, if this may be a question, especially for maybe Emily, to contribute to, whether it be to digital collections, or this might be for maybe Jeff, or maybe either from the Library of Congress, more ephemera of, I remember at one point Cornell was thinking of setting up some sort of, activist ephemera, live collection and things like that. So just the one question would be about, for those who have interesting materials, if there are ways to contribute those. And the other would be, as I was seeing from the Library of Congress, from NIU's digital, the Cormosia collection, or from Cornell, all the photos and maps and things like that. Are there linked there just sort of useful guides on citations and copyright issues? I was seeing, potential future book covers going through my mind here. So just any basic tips on that sort of thing would be helpful too. So any of you, please.
Well, I'll go ahead and give my best answer for both of those. I will say, and this isn't necessarily useful, but it's often individual to each specific case. Yeah. And that's sorry, I've got a cat coming through. That's an answer to both questions. So when it comes to contributing, there are different ways that different libraries, accept and ingest donations. And so, Jeff and others can answer for their own cases, but I would say as a general recommendation, it's always best to ask. So reaching out to a librarian and giving them some details about what you have, they can let you know if, it's something they already have, or if it would fit in a collection, here or elsewhere, etc. When it comes to copyright and rights issues, oftentimes that information will be in the metadata of the specific digital image. And if you still have questions, again, you can email the librarian who runs that repository and just ask for specifics. Because, while items are made freely available online, it doesn't always mean that they're free for reuse. And so double checking whether something is in the public domain or if there's still an existing copyright is always important before you go on to reproduce a digital item.
Can I add a few things there? So in terms of making contributions, if you mean looking for a place to donate things, an ephemera and so forth, we're always looking for that. And we're very happy. That's partly what made the Echols collection an amazing collection, is that you had students and professors from Cornell go to different areas of the world and bring back ephemera and books that they found. So let me know. Now we're pretty tight. The library is pretty tight on us about not accepting duplicates. But if it's not a duplicate, pamphlets and so forth, or something we don't have, and then you want to find a home for it, we can certainly help with that. We're very happy. Another thing on copyright. So we at the library have a copyright expert. That's what they do. So that's just one email away. If you want to use an image, many of our images that we've scanned, they're simply available. But if you have a question about an image or copyright, I can consult with their copyright expert. I also want to say, someone mentioned dust jacket covers. We have something that's a little rare. We actually have a dust jacket collection at the Echols collection. So these are dust jackets from books on Southeast Asia we've collected over the years. It's a pretty rare thing. That's available too. We could scan one, or someone could look through it.
Terrific. Okay. Emily, thank you for these links. And we have our Library of Congress resources also were previously posted. So if anyone joined the Zoom too late to get those, just drop me a note and I can resend those. All right, Chu Peng, you have a question.
Hi, yes, sorry. First of all, I just want to thank everybody here for having this conference. I guess it was very helpful. So my question is primarily for Professor McElwee and Charmaine. So I noticed that both of you, your research plans are also kind of kind of like national within the Southeast Asian region, right? So I myself is also, my dissertation was planned to happen, the fieldwork was planned to happen in Yangon, Myanmar for this past year. And obviously, right, as Professor Pamela, we were saying, it just kind of postponed, and we have to focus more on prioritizing our people's, safety and concern. So my question is for people, especially like grad students, who are not, necessarily have like funding secure to be waiting for like extra year to just, okay, let's just wait. And then maybe hopefully we can go back a year later. Some of us cannot afford to do that, right? So how do you also navigate that? And also you are not doing a transnational research. So your focus is on this one country and you're basically in the limbo, right? So I have to like kind of, what some of the points that Charmaine was talking about, I have to rethink all of that and everything. So that's kind of like the first question. And another question is also, when do you leverage, especially not maybe more like in the situation like in Myanmar right now with the coup, right? When do you leverage that is a good time for you to then start talking about research again with your collaborators? Because sometimes research is the last thing that people need. We don't need everybody going there to do research right now, right? So yeah, so I feel like it's a little bit more maybe like ethical kind of dilemmas that I have. So I just wanted to hear from your perspectives. Thank you.
Great questions. Either Pam or Charmaine wants to go first.
Sure, I'll address, particularly around the situation in Burma right now, which is obviously on lots of people's minds. Yeah, I mean, as grad students, on the one hand, yes, you can't delay, right? You can't say, give me a no-cost extension. You've got to do something. On the other hand, you do have some flexibility because you don't have people dependent on you. I am paying 12 people in my grant, and to say, I'm not going to pay you this year and we're going to do it next year wouldn't have worked. So in some ways, I have constraints with the funding that make it necessary to pivot in ways that I might not have chosen myself. So I would look at it as, you're a graduate student and you have flexibility in that sense. Your pathways aren't as cut off necessarily, in which case the best thing you can do is have confidence in your ability to come up with relevant research questions that are feasible for you to do from outside Burma. And one of the biggest problems I see with my graduate students who have to pivot for whatever reason, they can't answer a question, that's physically not possible to get to a place they wanted to go to, or they're finding a question as a dead-end question. One of the biggest problems they have is letting go of something that they had their heart set on doing. And the best way I pose it is, approach this as like a Zen moment. When one door closes, you don't know what other door is going to open, but you have to trust your intuition that you can find another door. And so to be as creative as possible, but always bear in mind that, there's an interesting question that one can ask about just about anything. And it's going to take more effort on your part to maybe move into a new area. But you have to have confidence in yourself that you can ask questions and answer those in a way that was going to be just as interesting as your first question. And maybe, mourn for your first question and the project that you wanted to do, because it is hard to let that go. I mean, I was devastated that I couldn't do my project on coffee. I mean, I was so interested in coffee and it was very hard to let it go. And then I ended up doing this project on protected areas, and I'm still working on protected areas today. So it's, and I don't miss. I mean, in fact, I have gotten back to coffee supply chains inadvertently through the protected areas stuff. So knowing when to say it's okay to do this pivot is a big part of it. And then, the other thing, of course, as you mentioned, keeping people safe on the ground. And so that is going to, depending on what's going on at any one time in Burma, is going to vary. As you know, that the situation is extremely fluid. For a while, it was mostly Yangon, then it was Mandalay that was concerning, and so forth. And you can only know that through speaking with your collaborators, and hopefully you already have a relationship there, and that you can, definitely express concern for their safety, urge them not to do anything. For my folks, it was just literally, they don't want to be outside of their houses. And so they didn't want to be having to go to the bank to do something and so forth. But they could potentially still, set up Zoom interviews. Now they don't want to do it right now because they're obviously have other things on their mind, but they said, once we feel that we can turn our mind back to this, there are things we can do. And somebody said to me, it's kind of nice to have something to do to take our minds off this as well. So there's a sort of way in which the research is a link outside of Burma that can be really helpful. And particularly if it's about amplifying voices that are not being heard, people who are under threat from the coup, then I think you can play a really important role in doing that amplification from outside in ways that people inside maybe can't do. So my best advice is be optimistic, be confident in yourself, look for new opportunities, and work with your collaborators to make sure everyone's comfortable with what the new plan is.
Yeah, so I guess my answer will probably reflect a lot of what Professor McElwee just mentioned. So I definitely empathize with the position that you're in. Yeah, I would say, are there other parts of your project that you can work on first that don't require field work right now? So maybe it's something like your literature review or some other part of either your empirical chapters as well might be a good way to just at least give yourself a little bit more time. I would say, as you mentioned, to the couple of questions that I asked at the beginning of my presentation, thinking about those, are there ways that you can pivot your research? Can you get things remotely? Can you use different types of data? These are hard questions, and I think what Professor McElwee said is exactly right, that sometimes we have to, unfortunately, kind of mourn these projects we really want to do, like ideally what we would be able to do, but unfortunately right now there's not a whole lot of things we can do. And I think what she also mentioned about ethics is yeah, definitely spot on. I think not, of course, the situation in Myanmar, that's obviously a really serious situation, but I think even in general, just even places just dealing with the pandemic and vaccination and all of that, I think these ethical questions are something that we'll all have to kind of grapple with for the next year or so. Even if we don't have these political situations, is it safe really even for us to go, meet people in person? And I think that's a question we'll have to ask ourselves. But I think, yeah, the advice of, asking your interlocutors, are they comfortable? What do they think? That's where I would go first, those kind of ethical questions as well.
I'm going to just take advantage of my position as a stand-in moderator to add one thing, and then there's a question in the chat from Hari. And that is to suggest that anyone who's done field research has hopefully done these IRB trainings and human subjects trainings and so forth. Those are not useless, but they also miss a lot of the key points that are really essential to keep in mind. So my main recommendation, and this is mostly for graduate students starting off and so forth, but it can be useful to just bear in mind anytime, is that choose a point about family and friends and just being really aware of the issues on the ground. The ethical dilemmas you face better than an IRB training knows those ethical dilemmas. And so the fact that something, and I am not suggesting that anyone here pushes that envelope, but just it's a note of for moderation and knowing all the more when to make those hard decisions to step back from a project, for instance, or when to take extra steps to safeguard your research partners or your interlocutors or whoever else, in many of the ways that Pam was saying, for instance, that if you know that regardless of what the IRB says that you can or can't do, that you may actually put somebody at risk in ways that just that process, that screening can't capture, or that you know just from what you know about the context as being a Southeast Asianist or an area specialist for any place, that you know that there's a longer term trajectory, that yeah, participating in this interview may not cause any great harm, or somebody may be perfectly willing, absolutely willing. I have this problem a lot. They want their name in there. They want to be identified. They don't want to be anonymous. But you know that's problematic. Find creative ways that you can respect and honor their contribution and not try to trivialize their desire to be heard and everything else without endangering their lives or their future prospects or their chance of holding a job or whatever else. So that can be a really tricky balance. And it's really, there is no one guide to help you do that. It's just something that benefits from area resources. And that's part of why it's helpful to know, hey, there's this whole network of people out there who work on this area who can really run through, read a draft for you with an eye toward, have I anonymized sufficiently? Always erring on the side of making it more anonymous when dealing with human subjects. And that all of that has new resonance now with, with COVID and so forth. All right. So there's a question here from, Eddie, who is unable to ask directly, but I hope is feeling better. And this is for Pam McElwee and Charmaine Willis. People often do not have, they can't afford basically to give internet access. So is there an issue of providing a quota? The terms for providing internet top-ups vary place by place, but is that appropriate in your view, ethically and methodologically, to provide people with, basically funds to get online?
Yes, definitely. I don't see any ethical issues with that. In fact, the ethics would be, if you weren't helping people be able to access you. The only question is the logistics of it. So I was mentioning I have an NSF grant right now in which I have contractees in the 3 countries. And so we actually send them wire transfers, and part of that pays for their ability to get internet access where they are. As graduate students, you may not be in that situation to do that, in which case, if you were physically on the ground, you might be able to buy the cards and distribute those around so people can access on mobile phones. It would obviously be more difficult now to do that, although not impossible. If you, for example, had a collaborator on the ground who actually could go to a mobile phone shop and buy those, and you would be able to transfer money to one person who could then distribute those around. So I think there are workarounds if necessary, but I would say, yeah, whatever we can do to make participating in our research for people, easy and not a burden on them, we should try to do as best we can, for sure.
Yeah, I don't have actually anything to add. I think the answer is perfect. I don't see any issues with it. Ethically, I think, yeah, methodologically, the question is really just how to do it. And I would have given the same recommendation about if you're, able to work with someone on the ground. If you're not able to get there yourself, there's no way for you to kind of transfer money or other ways to give internet access to people in your site. Certainly working with someone on the ground might be a way to do that.
And I would just add to that, wire transfer fees are not cheap. And so build those into your budgets. Right. So that is something I learned painfully as a dissertation student, and have done it ever since.
Good advice. Okay, so we're not swarmed with questions. People are being shy. I feel like I'm teaching. So what I will ask, I put this in the chat in case people didn't see. I would love to have others jump into this conversation. I'm guessing that most of you, probably quite a lot at least, have had disrupted research plans and or have been finding new ways to work with digital collections and with other materials. So it would be really helpful to hear from people who have worked in different countries or on different issues across disciplines who have done that. So any of you who have feel free to jump in while you're thinking. Jupang, please.
Yeah, sorry to be asking too many questions
That's
here.
fine.
But if there is no question, yeah, I guess for the librarians in the chat here, I also attended the Library of Congress. You had a webinar, I think the other time. I think Joshua and Ryan was there. I think my question is, right, like as I think Charmaine's presentation also point out, some of us are kind of pivoting into doing a little bit of the archival research too. And I feel like I'm not technically trained to do archival research. Like I'm kind of learning. It's like, okay, archival research, right? But what is it really? So I'm wondering if you all have any tips and tricks on, like, how to do archival research. And even after you find some things, how do you, like, I think Charmaine mentioned a little bit about the data kind of, like maintaining your data or something like that. But sometimes it's also very overwhelming, right? Like, so I'm kind of curious to hear your kind of strategies to organize all of those like archival research stuff, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, if I may. Thanks for that question. Well, I guess I'll just speak from some of my experience as a grad student too in the past. So with archival research, I think a big thing is knowing, how to find stuff in the archive and also knowing what's in the archive in general. So speaking to people who work closely, with those materials is important. So at the Library of Congress, we have various collections, but we also have uncatalogued things as well. For example, at Geography and Maps, we have a whole bunch of Southeast Asian maps that are not yet cataloged. So speaking with someone in that division who takes care of that collection of material, would really be a big help. They might be able to, you find out from just a discussion with them that, oh, actually there is this map, for example, that is related to your question that's not been cataloged, for example. And so I think just really reaching out to archivists, to librarians, that's I would say that would be a very good step to take. Another thing I would recommend in terms of archival research, depending on how much time you have, what resources you have, I remember I had to go to Spain once to do some archival research and I only had a month. And so it was in some ways a smash and grab operation. I tried to get as much as I could. I didn't have that much time to really organize and write notes on every little item. But one thing I found helpful at the end of the day was to just really to at least label material so that I had a way of going in. So you need to work out a system of figuring out, what documents, you've collected and things of that sort. So if you like to learn more about Southeast Asian collections at the Library of Congress, just feel free to reach out either through the Ask Librarian form or just by email. And, I'll be glad, both Ryan and I will be glad to, talk to you. We could even set up a Zoom meeting if that's, helpful.
And I'll add a little bit there. Oh, sorry, Jeff.
You
I'll add
go
a little
ahead.
bit here about using digital collections. So I think one of the key things to finding digital collections is also the search terms that you use. And so it can be helpful to browse digital collections or a digital library before you begin your search and take a look at the way that items are described and talked about in that specific digital archive. Because the terms that we as librarians have used to describe items and index them for the search function might not be the same way that you're used to talking about those items or topics in your research. So becoming familiar with the vocabularies used before you begin your search through browsing can help make sure that you're not missing things due to a simple misunderstanding or differences in the way that you talk and describe your work.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to just
Okay.
follow up briefly if I could. I just want to second what Joshua said, that it really makes a big difference when you can contact a librarian or archivist like ourselves directly, because again, same thing with Cornell, we have works in progress. We have things that we're processing that you may not be able to find in the catalog that we can tell you about. We may understand those items with some nuance that will allow us to realize that they may be connected to your work in some way when that might not be apparent just from the catalog record. And just having that, just knowing someone just makes a difference. You know, if you're trying to cold call a librarian in another country, I found it just really helps to know them in some way or to have a connection. So if you're ever trying to contact a library involved with in Southeast Asia or involved with Southeast Asia studies, let us know. We may know a fellow librarian there. And it's kind of a soft thing, but you'd be surprised at how much difference that can make.
Okay, great. I'm just going to add one thing as somebody was completely lost when I started off doing archival research many years ago. If you're going in person, my two main tips would be read everything you can, especially I also, the first time I went off to the National Archives in the UK, I had, just like 3 weeks to do this vast amount of research. Read everything you can and talk to people who've used those archives so that you know exactly what it will look like when you get there, what the process is, et cetera. So you don't waste time just figuring out the physical. This isn't for the digital, this is for the actual real, when you're in person. So you know what the process is, so you don't waste half your first day, just getting settled. And then the other thing would find any archive that's near you that you can, if you're going overseas to access archives for the first time, either use a digital archive, which would be a great way to try, or just go to, for me, I went to the US archives, totally different system, but it was just a good, to break yourself in on doing archival research if you're new to it. All right, we have 3 questions. I'll have you ask in the order in which I saw your hands. So why don't I have the 3 questions and then we'll have anyone answer any of them because we're down to 15 minutes. I've got Nerv, Weiliang, and then Asmus.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Weiss, for gathering us today. I'm really excited to be connected and part of the conversation. I just have a quick question about funding. I'm wondering to hear from our very helpful librarians in the room, what kind of funding mechanisms are available for researchers that who are considering doing archival visits, but also are those funding mechanisms for individual researchers, or also as a faculty, can I actually build a research team and can we apply as a team, or how do those funding mechanisms usually work?
Okay, again, we'll take a round of 3 questions and then I'll have anyone answer any of them and then we'll see where we are in time, just to make sure we get through all the questions. Okay, Weiliang.
Hi, thank you very much to all the panelists for this talk. This is great and I learned a lot. So my name is Weiliang and I mainly work on Vietnam, and I will be starting my history PhD at a university that has inadequate sources on Vietnam or Southeast Asia. So I actually have 2 questions. One is kind of similar to Nerv. I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. For someone at a university that doesn't have adequate resources or sources on the region or the country that we're working on. So I was wondering if there's any travel grant available, for example, at the Cornell library. And also I was wondering if we're going to plan for research on site, is there anything that we need to be aware of ahead of time, for example, like the wait time, the application or registration process, or how we call materials, if there's any way that we could have access on that, or just some general tips. And the second question is more specific. So I mainly worked on Vietnam, and I'm particularly interested in exploring the experience of the Cham. And I think I went to the talk by the Library of Congress, but I hope to consult expertise of all the librarians that are present here. So I'm hoping to look at sources that are in Chinese and French and Vietnamese to explore the story of the Cham. So I was wondering actually, where are these sources housed? I work with all of sources in all of these languages, and I would really appreciate your guidance. Thank you very much.
And Asmus?
Hey, thank you, everyone. I actually kind of had a suggestion or something I wanted to share, which had been really helpful to me during this whole period, which is to participate in the Zoom calls and Zoom events my interlocutors have been holding since I left the field. It's been really, really rewarding, and it's easy to have them record things and organize resources and organize research on their terms. So that's been super helpful. And I wanted to recommend that insofar as possible. Obviously, there are lots of cases where it's not, but that has been really helpful to me, and that's all I wanted to say.
Terrific. Okay, and the links are coming into the chat, but anyone who, I'll let you choose your sequence of who would like to speak first on these really excellent questions.
Hi, I just wanted to speak briefly about the library. We do have a fellowship, a travel fellowship. It's for individuals coming to use resources at the Asian division. It's on pause this year, but we think it will return to normal next year.
Great.
And it's from, I think, a few $100s to $3,000. So it can cover travel, but also accommodations. And, you know, coming from New York, your travel might not be that expensive, but it can be very expensive to spend any length of time in DC. I would also say if you're going to travel to the library, you can also come to nearby places to research. There are a lot of places in DC to research, like the National Archives. It's a 30-minute train ride from the Library of Congress to the National Archives. So things are pretty close. The USAID also has a library, which I think has a lot of interesting things about Southeast Asia. You know, I guess that you can, if you're here on a library grant, you can spin that to a number of different possibilities. But Joshua included a link on the travel grant for the library. And Wei Liang, I would just say, please feel free to contact us and we can have a more in-depth discussion with you about what we have for child materials in Vietnamese, French, and Chinese. So I think that would be a better way for us to address that.
Thank you very
Please
much.
contact us.
I can add some things. So to Nerv's question, good to see you again, Nerv. Well, so a lot of our funding opportunities go through the Southeast Asia program to visit Cornell, and people tend to piggyback off of that to use the library. So I know that they have these visiting fellow opportunities and so forth, and I've seen students as well tap into them. And when you get that, that can get you some library privileges. I'm not sure what the status of that is now, but the Southeast Asia program at Cornell has done a pretty good job of trying to make connections with people outside of the area in New York. And then the other one on the JOM, we do have materials on that, and we do actually have a lot of materials even in Chinese because we have a great East Asia collection as well, and that's in the top 10 in the United States. And also I purchased a lot of materials in Chinese on Southeast Asia. And we did have a grad student working on the JOM in Southeast Asia. I forget who it is now, but I will look up their name for you.
Thank you very much.
I also put something in the chat, some links to some Vietnam resources. I also wanted to add one thing really quickly, which is to say that if you're having trouble, if you want something and your home institution isn't getting it for you, ask us. We buy more than just for Cornell. We may be able to, in a sense, buy it for you and you can borrow it from us.
Sorry about this. And this is just an additional question. I know the interlibrary loan has been kind of postponed because of the pandemic. So I was wondering if we need, let's say we're trying to call materials, but they're not available at this time. If you have any suggestions related to this.
Yes. So here's the thing, if you're having trouble working with interlibrary loan for some reason, contact us directly. We may just be able to scan it for you on the spot personally, and we're happy to do that. It's a good idea to go through interlibrary loan sometimes, but sometimes if you're having trouble or you want it really quickly, we may be in the library and could do it just right away. Now, lately that's a little more difficult because we're not in as much, but give us a try. We'll try and get it for you directly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Any other comments or suggestions from any of the other panelists? Okay. All right, so we have just a few more minutes. I'm going to throw one more question to the audience into the mix, which would be, we would like to sustain this network. We want it to be useful. We may not, we don't know yet if we'll be able to do a similar conference each year, but we do want to have, we're already thinking ahead to some possible panels that we might have next fall. For instance, something on visas across getting research visas for different countries in Southeast Asia. There was a request to have a panel from Southeast Asians who do research in Southeast Asia, but work in the US, teach or doctoral students across the US, but do, research in countries that they're from or not from in Southeast Asia about that process. If you have other suggestions, particularly of programming that might be of use for graduate students and faculty, something akin to this, would love to hear them. Or if you want to volunteer yourself as an expert, you're welcome to do that as well. So in addition to any final questions or comments for the panel, feel free to add those in our last 6 minutes. Okay, so I've got a second on the getting visas and research permissions. All right. Final thoughts from any of the panelists, things that you forgot to mention are also fine. I'll make sure we don't run over. Okay, if we have reached the magical zoomed out moment, for my classes, it's usually 90 minutes. We've gone slightly longer than that. So thank you so very much, both to NYSEAN for making this happen and our representatives from NYSEAN who are here today, to Luce for funding NYSEAN to fund us, and especially to our really terrific panelists that we've had today, both Jeff and Emily from Cornell, Josh and Ryan from the Library of Congress, Pam and Charmaine. Thanks for your insight. Thanks for taking the time, and and also thanks to all of you for attending our very first NYSEAN PUC event. So I hope to see a lot of you for the events in the next 3 days. Spread the word if you have students or colleagues who might be interested. It is not too late to register. Click the link, register, voila, you're in. And thanks again. Have a good rest of the day.